Hello everyone, thanks for coming along. My name's Jack Lee, I'm from Origin Aqua, and we're located on that stand out there, so if you want to come and talk to us at any one point during the last couple of days, next days, that'd be great. I'm here today to talk to you about some alternatives to chlorination in swimming pools. I'm going to start this talk by explaining what bacteria are, because they're very relevant to this talk. Here in our technology that I'm going to discuss later, we harness bacteria for benefits and to harness some of the amazing things that they can do. So I'll start by explaining what exactly they are. They are single-celled organisms. They come in a wide range of different shapes and sizes. And they're microscopic, so their average size is about 2 microns, which is 0.002 millimeters, so they're tiny. And they're found basically anywhere on Earth. Anywhere you look, you'll find bacteria. In this top left example, in like an alpine lake, for example, in a milliliter of that water, there can be up to 1 million bacterial cells, and all of these are doing really useful ecosystem functions, such as cycling nutrients, outcompeting nasty pathogens that might be finding their way into that water body. In a handful of agricultural fertile soil, there's more bacterial cells than all of the humans that have ever lived on this planet. So a gram of fertile soil there can have over 1 billion individual bacterial cells. And again, all of these are doing really useful things in terms of turning over nutrients, fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere. In deep hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, even where there's no sunlight and there are many, many bar down below the ocean, there are bacteria that survive there, and instead of using oxygen and sunlight, they're actually using gases that come from the Earth's core. So they're pretty incredible little bits of life. In this bottom left picture here, that's a root nodule of a nitrogen-fixing plant. In those root nodules, there are bacteria that fix nitrogen from the air and input that nitrogen into the plant. So without those bacteria, nitrogen wouldn't even find its way into the food cycle, and life as we know it wouldn't exist. There's some really cool facts about bacteria as well. If you lined up all the bacteria on the planet end to end, they'd stretch about 1.2 billion light years, which is across our Milky Way about 100,000 times. That carbon that's stored in those individual bacterial cells is also colossal. It's the equivalent of about 58 billion blue whales, which is quite mind-boggling. In a human body, there's more bacterial cells than your own human cells, and they've been evolving on this planet for about 3.2 billion years. And it's during this massive evolutionary history that they've become incredibly diverse. This is a tree, a very simplified tree of life on Earth. All the animals that you can think of, including humans, are this one tiny little branch up there. All of the plants that you can imagine are that tiny little branch on there, and the rest of those, especially in the blue area, are all bacteria. Incredibly diverse, and they have a whole range of genetic diversity that allows them to do some really interesting processes. This is another bit more complicated tree of life, but the point is the same. All of the animals that you can even think exist is that one tiny little branch down there. And all of the rest of this is bacterial diversity. Well, why does this matter? Well, a huge amount of bacteria that you come across and exist on the planet are beneficial to humans and life. About 0.1% of bacterial species that we know actually are involved in human health and are pathogenic. We're also increasingly understanding this thing called the microbiome depletion hypothesis, which states that by living in a very clean, sterile, sanitary environment, we're depleting this natural diversity of bacteria with certain negative effects. The analogy here is very similar to peanut allergies. About 5-10 years ago, there was very, very big drive towards reducing exposure of peanuts to below 2-year-olds. And the consequences of that is we're having an epidemic of allergies because of that advice. So instead of being exposed to these kind of things from a younger age, you can actually lead to some big consequences. The same analogy is with bacteria. We naturally need to be exposed to these beneficial bacteria, triggering our immune system, etc. Even more than that, there's something called the skin microbiome. This is where bacteria are actually all over all of our skin. And there's a whole suite of beneficial microbes that live on our skin. And bringing this now, segueing a little bit towards the wet leisure industry or towards swimming pools, is there's an interesting hypothesis that athlete's foot, which is often associated with swimming pools, is actually linked to chlorine disrupting this natural microbiome that's on our skin and allowing certain pathogens to take advantage of that. We're also heavily understanding how bacteria are involved in the gut microbiome and how basically every bit of food that you eat or energy that you're putting into your mouth is actually feeding these bacteria that are in our guts. These are producing a whole suite of compounds and breaking down our food. And we're only really beginning to understand the importance of this diversity. So where would we be without bacteria? Well, the planet would look probably worse than that because there's actually soil in there and there wouldn't even be any soil. But even more so, at a more philosophical level, we wouldn't even exist because this is an animal cell, a human cell, and within that are these organelles called mitochondria. Now these produce energy and basically they're involved in all sorts of metabolism. These used to be free-living bacterial cells which had a relationship with these early eukaryotic cells, and they're now actually embedded in the cell, and they have their own bacterial DNA. So even without bacteria, we literally wouldn't be here at all. So how does this relate to swimming pools? Well, in swimming pools, there are common enemies that we all face. Algae is one of our main common enemies that we're trying to fight against, as well as pathogenic bacteria. So that 0.1%, less than 0.1% of bacteria that we don't want to be in our water, we want to know how we control those. One way of doing this is what I call the nuclear approach, and this is using chlorination. Now this is a very effective way of controlling pathogens in swimming pools. However, it also destroys all good and all bad bacteria. It's not specific, it just kills everything in the water. Now this is excellent for heavily used municipal swimming pools. For potable water, it's saved millions of years, so this isn't an anti-chlorine talk at all. It has a role to play, especially in hot tubs as well, which are incredibly difficult to manage, even with a nuclear arsenal that you've got in your chemical bank there. And it's highly effective when water is balanced. So when your pHs and other parameters are balanced well, it's very effective. However, nuclear approaches generate pollution. And as each year goes on, I gave this talk a couple of years ago, and the known disinfecting byproducts number was about sort of 600 and 700 known byproducts. We're now over 800. These are compounds that are produced when chlorine interacts with organic matters, and it makes a whole suite of nasty chemistry. And as time goes on, this number's getting bigger. And this is a slide here that shows only some of the 800 of known disinfecting byproducts. I tried to upload them all on this slide, actually, but it was so vast, the list, that it kept making my computer crash. So there's a whole load of chemicals there. Some of them are quite nasty, but don't take my word for it. This is a heavily studied area of chemistry and water science. There's thousands of papers published, and since I gave this talk last year, there's 1,500 papers published on some of these disinfection byproducts that are produced when chlorine interacts with nitrogen-based compounds in water chemistry. There's an environmental consequence of using chlorine as well, producing chlorine. The embodied energy in producing a kilo of recycled steel is comparable to the embodied energy in making a kilo of chlorine. So for each ton of chlorine is about 3,500 kilowatts of energy, which is equivalent of 1,100 kettles basically boiling for an hour. It's a huge amount of energy, and with increased energy prices, because chlorine is basically produced using electrolysis, that's driving the price up of these chemicals as well. When you model in the transport of these as well, you're moving them around the country, around the world, there's a big environmental footprint of that. There's also an environmental footprint in terms of building structures. So this pool on the left is a pool that we renovated a few years ago. It had a wooden frame, and the chlorine gas over the years was essentially eating that wood away. It can also, these kind of fumes off chlorine pools can also impact steel frames and concrete frame buildings. There's also social consequences. So by moving these chemicals around, people are getting exposed to these. People are driving them in their van. There can be quite nasty fumes that can be made. And also there's stories each year about chlorine mismanagement in swimming pools causing issues as well. So are there any other kind of like low chlorine options that are out there? Well, hydrogen peroxide is an amazing chemical. It's hydrogen and oxygen. And when it's highly effective at breaking down and killing pathogens. And when it reacts with organics, It doesn't produce any of the disinfectant byproducts that were mentioned in those lists earlier. And it actually just breaks down, as you can see there, hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, breaks down to water and oxygen. However, it's very dependent on water chemistry. You still have to transfer and transport this chemical around the country. It's very expensive nowadays. The price of hydrogen peroxide is also high, and it's also used as it can be used in explosives. So now it's becoming highly regulated as well. So peroxide isn't really that much of a viable option. There are some other low chlorine options out there. Again, all of these rely on chemicals, making sure the water's chemically balanced, which has the negatives that I mentioned earlier. They've still got to be transferred around, and disinfectant byproducts are still produced. And a whole suite of those, the 3,000 potential disinfectant byproducts I mentioned earlier, are actually also studied from drinking water, from potable water, where chlorination is still used. And that's even at like sub 1 ppm of chlorine levels. And again, the cost of chems is going up each year. So what's the end result of this? Well, you have these lovely, luxurious swimming pools filled with very unluxurious water, full of all these chemicals that you can't see, but you can very often smell. In fact, in a well-managed chlorinated pool, you shouldn't really even smell the chlorine, but what you're smelling there is these byproducts that are being produced all the time in the water chemistry. And the water itself is a lot of the time the product that the clients and consumers and users are looking to use. That's what they're experiencing firsthand. So we very much think this is like having a Ferrari and then putting a lawnmower engine on the inside of it. There's also a commercial drive against chemical use, with about 1 in 3 clients coming to us wanting low chlorine or no chlorine options for their water treatment. There's an increased in allergies as well. This links to my earlier point about the peanut analogy I was mentioning. This has led to an increase in children having eczema, asthma, so consumers are looking for low chlorine types of technology to protect their children. Also, consumers are much more understanding and aware of the microbiome and how important bacteria are in our health, ranging from the microbiome in the gut that I was mentioning about, all the way to our skin microbiome. And this offers potential businesses a USP to offer a technology that, instead of looking to kill all bacteria, looks to harness the beneficial ones and works hand in hand with their own microbiome. There's also an increase in the understanding of wild swimming, and people are experienced in swimming waters that don't have chlorine and chemical in. That's driving a big commercial market as well. So what does a nature-based solution, what is a solution that doesn't contain chlorine look like? Well, the first thing we do is we have nutrient control, advanced nutrient control. So this is harboring a biofilter, which is essentially a consortium, a community of lots of bacteria, all doing different things, but mainly breaking down and controlling these key nutrients. So this is phosphorus, which is the absolute enemy of a natural swimming pool, or any kind of swimming pool in principle. Phosphorus is the backbone of DNA, so bacteria, pathogenic bacteria and algae need lots of phosphorus to be able to grow and divide. So if you can control phosphorus to very low levels, you can indirectly control pathogen and algae growth quite successfully. Carbon and nitrogen. Nitrogen is very important for making amino acids, which make proteins. So if you can control your nitrogen levels as well, you can indirectly control pathogenic bacteria and algae in the water. There's also predation. This is the second step. So if you have a very healthy biofilter with naturally occurring bacteria that are adapted to living in fresh water, they will outcompete pathogenic bacteria quite easily, where pathogenic bacteria like 37 degrees, they like warm bodies, they don't like environmental water samples. So there's competition constantly going on within this biofilter. If you have water that is incredibly pure and low in nutrients, this water becomes very stressful for bacteria. We've done a lot for pathogenic bacteria. We've done lots of studies and looked at the decay rates of different types of bacteria like E. coli, Enterococci, Pseudomonas, these kind of nasty indicator species, and seen die off literally just within the water when you have these kind of really stressful environments, low nutrients, high purity. And lastly, you can combine other backstops such as UV, which is highly efficient against bacteria in the water sample, in the water body of the pool. You can also dose a range of minerals, because anything you put in a natural pool that will kill algae or nasty bacteria will also kill your beneficial bacteria in your biofilter. So you have to be very careful about how you do that. But there are certain minerals and compounds that you can add that disrupt things like photosynthesis, for example, which stops algae proliferating but doesn't impact your bacteria growing within your biofilter. So when you combine these stages together, the whole is greater than the sum, and these all work together hand in hand to try and control algae and nasty pathogenic bacteria in the water column. Now, this has been done before. This is not new technology, what I'm talking about today. Natural swimming pools have been around in Austria and Germany since the 80s. The principles are very similar to everything I just mentioned. However, the big standouts here are that there's obviously plants in these areas, large planted areas relative to the swimming area, as you'll see. And these planted areas are full of gravel. This is a cross-section of what's going on. Essentially, there's a giant biofilter there growing on these gravel beds. Water is flown across those, and those bacteria there are doing the processes I've mentioned. The plants are doing a small amount, but it's mainly the bacteria. Now, one of the biggest negatives of this is being able to clean and maintain these planted zones is very difficult. And that's the true way where you get net loss of nutrients from the system, is by actually being able to clean these areas up. So natural swimming pools have some quite big drawbacks. They can't be heated. They have these big areas, up to 40 to 50% of the surface area of the pool needs to be designated to these regeneration zones, so you lose quite a lot of space for swimming. They're relatively hard to maintain. Algae blooms go through boom and bust cycles, and there's a lot of wildlife in them, which not all clients want to be swimming with, newts and toads and frogs, etc. So what's the solution that we're proposing? I'm not here today to sell you our system, but I'm here to talk about what we're offering. And this is taking the benefits of what the natural pool system's doing, but putting it into a modular, serviceable filter that has the following benefits: fresh water that's akin to swimming in mineral water. It has over 50% less energy use than a chlorinated swimming pool in terms of not only just pump filtration, but also the ongoing chemical burden. Less maintenance, as it can all be automated. All the backwashing of that biofilter can be automated by the control panel. There's no need for the aquatic plants or the plant zones, because those processes that the plant zones are doing is basically being replicated within that filter body. And there's absolutely no chlorine, no copper, no salt, no disinfectant byproducts being produced in that water. So the solution, the consequences of chlorine, the environmental impact I mentioned earlier basically disappears. Consequences of chlorine for the building disappears. You don't have these gases being produced that are corroding your buildings away. You don't have the nasty chemicals to transport around the country or expose your employees or workers to. You don't have to worry about allergies and skin reactions. And fundamentally, the 800 plus DBPs that are being produced in swimming pools aren't being produced. The end result is that we have luxurious water, mineral water, kept clear without any need for any heavy, harsh chemicals. That all sounds great, but how do we know they're safe? That's the number one question I get all the time. How do they compare? How do we manage risk in natural swimming pools? We use things known as indicator species. So these are a range of bacteria that, if they're present in water, they're an indication that that water is not very safe, i.e. it could be contaminated with fecal matter or some other nastiness. So E. coli is the main one. Pseudomonas and Enterococci are indicator species that we look at a lot. So we've done over 10 years worth of microbiological research on this. We start by sort of quantifying what we deem to be safe levels of all of those indicator species. Now, this here is a graph of the European freshwater standard for excellent water quality. So you can see here the freshwater limit for E. coli is about 500 CFUs per 100 milliliters. So that means in 100 milliliters of water, you can have up to 500 individual E. coli cells in theory. That equates to about 200 CFU per 100 mils for Enterococci. Again, if you're below that, you're deemed excellent freshwater quality by the EU sort of swimming standards. You can see that we've developed our own standards, which are far lower than those. And we've got results from over 100, well, probably about 190 now, pushing 200 individual sites where we've got microbiological data, and our averages are plotted on here. So our standards are 94% lower than the EU standards for excellent water. The E. coli is 277 times lower than what is deemed excellent by the EU freshwater limit. And here's some of the data. So that's our guidance that we've got there. So we've got 30 CFUs per 100 mils for all of those 3 indicator species. And on the right-hand side is the data that we've collected over all these years. We've also got some boutique hotels out there that have a bit more usage than some of our domestic pools. And the results there are summarized again. There's probably over about 200, 300 sample individual data points in all of that. We've also done some really interesting studies to look at where this sort of microbiological die-off happens across the filtration system. So here we've deliberately contaminated the water. You can see, let's look at the top blue line, which is total coliforms in this example. As that gets pumped across the biological filter, you can see just the biofilter on its own is leading to this massive drop in indicator species coming off the back end of the filter. When you throw in a UV at the end of that, you get down to 0, basically. You can go in up to 700 CFUs per 100 mils and come off out the back end 0. So there's a whole die-off there that's occurring not just in the biological filter, but the UV filter as well, which sanitizes the water. We published some of this data in a nature-based journal here, and here we showed that we saw about a 99.8 to 99.4% reduction in some of these indicator species across the biological filter. So a quick high summary of what our technology offers. Again, we're looking at 0 chlorine water. Our stand is just over here, so we'd love to, if you're here for the next day or so, come and talk to us and hear more about our technology. And yeah, I'm open to any questions at all that you may have. Thank you very much.
Hi. Yeah, I've come across non-chlorine development across European pools with certain presentations kind of saying that they've kind of introduced it and tested it, which is great. So we're really talking about microfiltration, UV, and I guess you're talking about also good circulation through the water.
Yep.
Because that's going to be moving across. One of the problems they seem to find in the was biofilms. In certain areas where it hadn't had chance to kind of circulate properly. Is that something you've come across?
Yes, yeah, good question. You're completely right. The actual movement of the water around swimming pools is far more important than we ever really imagined. And when a lot of our business is involved in looking at renovating old systems from chlorine, where someone wants to get rid of their chlorine system and upgrade it to our system. And you get there and there's one skimmer, one jet, it's 1.5 inch pipe work, and you're sort of banging your head against the wall like, this is part of our system, part of the solution of being able to utilize natural filtration. Water movement is very important, not just in terms of the number of times a day you're looking to treat that volume of pool water, but actually the way the water, the hydraulics, the way it moves around. True, in areas where there's, if you've got a dead zone of that swimming pool, that will be prone to biofilms forming, and that can be observed. Part of the way of addressing that is trying to increase circulation as much as you possibly can, avoiding these dead zones in swimming pools, which can happen, and that tends to sort of reduce the risk. I take it you're talking about biofilms of algae or yeah, exactly.
Just secondary in terms of if it was, a full commercial pool to convert.
Yeah.
What are we talking other than the actual change of filtration and equipment? Is it cost-wise? Is it going to be prohibitive?
So a lot of the market we're looking at is domestic scale. At the moment, if you mention sort of commercial stuff, that's probably a bit far ahead. And heavily used municipal swimming pools, as I mentioned, chlorine does have a role to play in certain situations. It is more expensive, our technology, and it depends on the pool size and the pool use and what kind of, there's a few parameters that determine which size filter we've got. There's sort of different size, it comes in different sizes, but there is an economic payback on it. So the return on investment is typically, for an indoor pool, between sort of 4 and 6 years. It is more expensive. It could be up to sort of four times more expensive than maybe only 2 times more expensive than like a low chlorine, top of the range automated system. But yeah, there is an upfront sort of capital investment.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? thank you for coming. If you want to come and talk to us, we are literally over there. So yeah, thank you very much.